This is Gloria De Piero with you till 1. And at this point in the programme, we like to hear from the people who are affected by the debates and decisions in national and local government. Today, I'm joined by Paul Afshar, Tasha Letchford and Giles Grover, who are among the 600,000 people living in flats with problem cladding and were anxiously waiting for the government's announcement. On Wednesday, Robert Jenrick, the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, laid it out.
Leaseholders in high-rise residential buildings will face no cost for cladding remediation works. We will make further funding available to pay for the removal and replacement of unsafe cladding for all leaseholders in high-rise residential buildings of 18 metres and above, or above 6 stories in England.
Paul, Giles and Tasha, welcome.
Good morning.
Hi.
Morning to you all. I'd like to hear from all of you about the situation that you find yourselves in and what, if anything, this week's announcement means for you. So, Paul, let's start with you. Your building is less than 18 metres. Just tell us about your situation first.
That's right, Gloria. My building is 4 stories high. It's a shared ownership flat that I bought several years ago on the government scheme. And unfortunately, this week's announcement from the Housing Minister, Robert Jenrick, will do nothing to help solve my problem. My flat is at the moment unsellable. I've tried to sell it twice in the last 12 months. No mortgage lender will lend to a buyer on the basis that it has cladding on the outside. So I'm stuck here having sleepless nights, worrying about whether the flat is or isn't safe, and waiting for further action from the government. The sad irony of all of this is that Prime Minister Boris Johnson stood up in Parliament just a week before and promised us that he and the government would take action to make sure that homeowners like myself would not have to foot the bill, the crippling bill, for dangerous cladding on our flats. And just this week, the Housing Minister, Robert Jenrick, whose sole qualification to be Housing Minister seems to be that he has a lot of houses, stood up in Parliament and broke that promise. It's a betrayal.
A betrayal. It does sound extremely grim and difficult. Tasha, you're in a 6th floor flat in Southampton. Tell me your situation, please.
Yeah, so my building is over 18 metres, so we are one of the buildings that will benefit from this announcement to some extent, although even for buildings over 18 metres, it simply doesn't go far enough. So I live in a block with HPL cladding, and various other issues. We've got missing fire breaks, compartmentation issues, and we have had government funding released for our cladding remediation, but the other issues aren't being covered by the government fund. So this is where, unless the building owners take the step to cover those themselves, then the leaseholders will pay for those issues. So although it will make my building safe, the cost of that will be significant. You know, we're talking sort of 40% sometimes of the overall cost to fix the buildings, which won't be covered by the government fund. And so in some cases, the buildings won't be made safe at all, and in others, leaseholders will be footing the bill for those.
And Tasha, you're also a lawyer, and that
Yes.
complicates things even more, doesn't it?
Yeah, so my worry since the beginning of all of this, we found out about our building about a year ago, and my worst nightmare really has always been that I simply can't afford to pay the costs, and in that case I would be forced to declare bankruptcy, and I would lose my flat and my job at the same time, because obviously as a qualified solicitor I can't be made bankrupt. So that really has weighed heavily on me for the past year.
Giles, tell us about your situation.
Hi, good morning. I'm on the 9th floor of a 12-storey building. It was only about 2 months after the Grenfell tragedy that we were told that we have exactly the same cladding, so the aluminium material. Almost 4 years after Grenfell, that's still on our building. We think that might be taken off soon, but we still don't know. Added to that, we've got a range of other problems in terms of other unsafe cladding, other issues with the insulation behind the brickwork, lack of fire protection to the steel framework. So far, we've had costs of about £40,000. We believe the government will help about £20,000 for that. I've watched Mr. Jenrick's statement. I've read it over and over again. I don't really see how anything's changed for me, because we've still got a range of problems that I'm going to have to find £25,000 to cover if you want to make our home safe.
Let me bring in Kevin Holinrake, who is the Conservative MP for Thirsk and Moulton and is a former member of the Housing Select Committee. Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
Kevin, I know you're on a train.
Yes.
Did you manage to hear those pretty...
Yes, I did.
Right,
I did.
okay. Well, over to you then.
I'm very, very sympathetic about the problems. I mean, I think it's important we take a step back when this tragedy happened at Grenfell. And I think the government, at that point in time, everybody suddenly realised decades of failure in the construction industry had led to this catastrophic problem. At Grenfell, obviously the tragedy, but also lots of other buildings had problems. I, like lots of other MPs, then campaigned for a complete ban on all combustible materials, combustible external wall systems. The government did that pretty much straight away. And obviously then that solves the problems going forward, a lot of the problems. But then obviously we're stuck with this problem then with all the buildings that have been constructed like that. And we focus very much on the high-rise, high-risk buildings. That's where you've got much higher chance of having a catastrophic event which leads to loss of life. So this fund was always there to solve external wall systems, not all the problems in a building. And what you've got here, Afshar and your other contributors, are problems caused by the building owners, the developers. Now, in about half of cases, the people who built the block does step in and remediate. But there is no doubt there are some situations where that is not the case. And the reality is some leaseholders will have to pick up some of the cost of some of this remediation. But the government, it's not the government money, clearly, it's taxpayers' money, and the government's got a huge amount in, £5 billion. That's more than any other country on the planet, I understand. Certainly, there's no scheme like that in Wales or Scotland. But there is a limit to what the taxpayer can contribute to this. But I do very much sympathise with the people who are in this situation. But ultimately, it is a lot of these problems. You're talking about missing fire breaks and or other problems with the work that's been done in those buildings. Ultimately, people who did the construction are the people responsible for that.
Kevin,
Yeah.
I think, and it's not a perfect line, but I think you said at the top that it's important to distinguish, to make a differentiation between what happened at Grenfell and these cladding issues. Why do you say that?
Because what was established after Grenfell happened because of the cladding, principally the cladding, and to some extent insulation. Insulation's done at the same time. That's what the change in the building regulations happened after Grenfell, and that's what the fund has been there to remediate. It's not there to remediate every single problem in every single building.
Well, some people would say it is. Paul, what would you say to Kevin?
I appreciate everything that Kevin said, but my situation is a dangerous one still. You know, fire doesn't discriminate as to whether you're on the 9th floor or the 4th floor. It is a fire, and if the cladding is dangerous, it's dangerous. Period. I'm afraid. I just want to sort of come in and add that the funding that was proposed for people in my situation is a loan that's going to be longer than my mortgage term. And I did the maths after the Housing Minister's announcement in Parliament on Wednesday. If according to his figures, to take out a loan to cover potentially £40,000 worth of remediation work, it'll take me 66 years to pay it back. So I'll be 103 by the time I've paid off Robert Jenrick's cladding loan. I'm sooner to get a card from the Queen than I am to unsaddle myself of this debt. It just beggars belief, in all honesty.
It beggars belief, Kevin.
I'm sorry, Paul. I didn't hear your case. I'd like to know more about it. I think the answer to a lot of this is going to be in the details of the loan scheme. I presume you're in a block of flats between 4 and 6 stories. So we need to see the detail behind this scheme. Clearly, you will have sold that flat at some point. And what to me, what this does is makes your flat saleable where it wasn't before. But nevertheless, I do understand your situation. The risks in terms of fire are much, 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 much lower in a smaller building. You've got four times as much risk in a high-rise building compared to a low-rise building. So the risks are less. I do appreciate what you're saying. There are the other mitigations you can put in place, like fire alarms, like sprinklers. Nobody's ever died in a building that's got sprinklers. But I think the key to this is seeing the detail behind this scheme that's going to be available to you to remediate your building.
Kevin, why do you think your parliamentary colleague on the same benches as you, Stephen McPartland, why do you think he said that on listening to the government's response, this is to his own party, to his own government, that he had his head in his hands during the statement? Now, this isn't sort of opposition against government or, front bench. It's like it's colleagues on your own side that are saying this is a disaster.
Yes. Stephen speaks for himself. I can't speak for Stephen, but most of my colleagues don't agree with that position. This is £5 billion of taxpayers' money. It's exactly what the Select Committee, which is a cross-party Select Committee, called for when this disaster happened in the aftermath. Even in their most recent report in July of last year, they asked the government to focus on the high-risk, high-rise buildings and put £3.5 billion in, an extra 3.5. That's exactly what they've done. So I don't think it's right to say this is, you should have your head in your hands about this. This solves a problem for many, 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 many leaseholders. So I think that, and this is taxpayers' money, clearly the government's got a responsibility to try and be careful with that taxpayers' money, and where it can, get the actual people responsible for these failures to remediate those buildings.
Tasha, Kevin's saying that those who are responsible, well, actually, are you making those responsible? You're not making those responsible pay to repair Tasha's or to make safe Tasha's flat or Giles's flat or Paul's flat, though, are you?
Well, I would do. I certainly would do if Tasha is a solicitor, as you say. If we can identify that if the developer's responsible, that's still in business, and they've got problems with missing fire breaks, I think as Natasha said, then that developer should come back and remediate that building. There's no doubt about it. So I don't know the specific case, but that should be the first port of call. If we can't establish who's responsible, then you've got the government fund to
Tasha,
problem in the building.
Tasha, do you want to respond?
Yes, of course. So we have. We're not able to claim through any of those avenues. We have, my building is less than 10 years old, but it's more than 6 years old. So outside of the limitation period for claims on the developers at that point, we can't claim via NHBC because they aren't dealing with these types of claims, and developers are not going to pay voluntarily. They're just not going to do it. The government has the power to make...
Natasha?
Sorry?
Who was the developer?
It was Drew Smith.
Okay. I mean...
So they aren't going to pay voluntarily, and the government is not making them pay yet. The government could put the money up front and then claim it back from developers, which they are introducing, but that isn't happening yet. So yes, there's a responsibility to protect taxpayers' money, and we're not asking for taxpayers' money, but we're asking for the government to expand the scope of this to cover all of the issues and all of the buildings, and then claim that money back from developers, which they haven't done.
That sounds reasonable, doesn't it, Kevin? At least that's a halfway house. She's not asking for taxpayers' money.
That's pretty what the government, which everybody's asking for taxpayers' money. The £5 billion is taxpayers' money, and that's exactly what the government has done. It stepped in and said, we'll put this £5 billion in, and then we'll reclaim it from developers. And this is not replacing the responsibility for a developer who's still in business for remediating a problem it has caused. So certainly, I would urge the government certainly to step in and put pressure on developers, such as the one that Natasha refers to, and to leaseholders themselves. And there are obviously legal means of doing that if you can prove fault of the developer. And if it's true that there are problems with the installation as well as the materials, it sounds like there's a very good case there. But as Natasha knows, these are leasehold. There is a principle applying to purchase anything in the UK, which is caveat emptor, which is the buyer beware. The buyer does have a responsibility in terms of making sure that a property is fit for purpose, which means, of course, the advisors who help them, that solicitors, surveyors, are on the hook for this as well. So I don't think it's right to simply say the taxpayer took the bill for everything, but I think the government's done the right thing in stepping in and filling the gap where you can't hold the developer responsible.
Giles, any words of comfort for you? I sense not.
Not in the slightest. He's still using that caveat emptor line, which is just absolute nonsense, because we bought our homes to the place, we relied upon to follow. Oh, is that his train, Kevin?
That's his train. That's Kevin's train, but but he's all right.
The fact is, successive governments, the regulations were poor, they were inadequate, and it allowed the builders to do what they wanted to. We did all the checks and balances, and just a couple of points. So Kevin said, look at what the Cross-Party Select Committee has said. The Cross-Party Select Committee also said that it would be an abdication of responsibility on the government's part to make us pay a single penny. We've already paid thousands of pounds on interim measures, on insurances, on some remediation. He now wants to force us into a £50 per month loan scheme if we're under 18 metres. Might go for 50 years, might go for 100 years if you compound the interest. One particular point I'd like to make is, Kevin, less than 2 weeks ago, you yourself said that it's come from a systemic failure over decades. You said it's the work of governments and divide. You've also said some might be possibly held by the taxpayer, the cost. It would be wrong to put the cost of the door of leaseholders. So what has changed in the last 10 days when you said leaseholders should not be involved here, you'd advocate more money, spread the cost around industry but not to leaseholders? 10 days later, why have you completely changed your mind? Please tell us.
I haven't changed my mind at all. My reference all the way through this and my work on the select committee was the highest risk high-rise buildings. I have absolutely never said, Giles, that the government or taxpayers should step in and remediate every single problem in every single building. Now, the primary responsible for all the cases.
One at a time, if that's okay. Kevin's got a right to respond.
All the cases I've heard on the call today have involved developer responsibility, and I don't absolutely. You're right, Giles. I absolutely think there's been decades of failure in the building regulatory system, and I do think the government had a responsibility to step in and do something, and that's exactly what it's done. I think, as I said, the key to this, and I do very much sympathise with your situation, the key to this is getting the detail right in terms of the fund that's going to help remediate your building, making it fair, making sure your building is still saleable, and making sure that you only bear a fair element of the costs of this. But ideally, what we should all work towards is the developers stepping in and remediating this building where we can find faults.
Okay. On that,
Could we
Kevin.
come back on that?
Can I just come? Yes, in a second. Just let me come back because I want to put a quote to Kevin on that point. You point out that the government's introducing a tax on residential developers from 2022. There will be a planning levy on future high-rise developments. But we spoke to Andrew Southern, who's the chairman of Southern Grove, a London-based developer of high-rise residential buildings, who said taxing developers, most of whom weren't responsible for the cladding crisis, is just laughable. This sort of regressive tax will only stagnate house buildings, which is the exact opposite of what the UK needs.
Well, I mean, clearly there's a vested interest there. I mean, I absolutely. Who's going to pay for it? Who's going to pay for it? Can we put all the costs at the door of the leaseholders? Can we put all the cost of taxpayers? No, we can't. I think there has been a failure in the construction industry. There's also been a failure in the building materials industry, particularly the insulation manufacturers. And I have one in my constituency, a very large one, and I think there should be a levy on those construction companies as well, those material supply companies as well. So I think this is the least worst option is getting the construction industry to help remediate where we can't find an individual developer responsible.
Now, one of you wanted to come back before I jumped in. Which one was it? I know it was a fella.
Giles, I think, yeah.
Giles, go for it.
Yeah, sorry, I do apologise if I'm getting quite irate at what Kevin's saying. So the point is, it's not a cost to the taxpayer if it's done right. If you spread it over time, then you'll cover that money from the developers. The government has subsidised developers for decades in terms of Help to Buy, government-assisted schemes. That's been a third of their revenue. That's made the developers make 10 billion over the last few years. That's just gone into upping the share price, director payments. Look at the Persimmon making a big noise about 75 million. That's the amount that was paid for the boss a couple of years ago. So the fact is that my bugbear is every year the Exchequer loses 16.1 billion to the zero rate of new homes. Absolutely build new homes, but you're going to ruin the whole property prices across the north. The blue wall's going to crumble. We're not just saying it's a cost to the taxpayer. We've always said developer levy, insurers, but only government can do that. Look at the revelations of the Kingspan shocking faking of the tests at the Grenfell inquiry. Why isn't the government taking action about that to protect us? The Conservatives are meant to be the party of home ownership and fairness. They're making us take a cladding tax when they could make the developers take that. It's not fair. It's not right. It's actually disgusting.
Finally, Laura has been...
That's exactly what we are doing. I mean, we're in violent agreement. A tax on developers, and I agree with tax on the building materials providers as well. Absolutely agree with that.
But it's not going to help. It's not going to help our guests. Let me put to you a point that Laura, who has got in touch while listening. Laura from Golders Green, you've suggested we pursue those responsible. Please, can you ask him who I should direct my case to within government? My block is unsellable due to the government producing new legislation and applying that retrospectively to existing buildings. My developer built my block to regulations at the time it was built. What are my legal means for fault of the government's legislators?
That's actually not what's happened. So what the government has done is it hasn't retrospectively applied building regulations. It can't do that. But what's happened is the buildings that were constructed to the building regulations at the time are now seen as unsaleable because the lenders don't want to take the risk and the insurers don't want to take the risk, which is making them unsaleable. The government's not saying you can't sell those, but just nobody wants to buy them because of the risk. So what the government's done is stepped in and provided the funds to remediate those old buildings, as well as banning these materials on new buildings.
Right, OK. I'm going to go back to Paul, Tasha and Giles, because I don't think we're going to get consensus of any kind. I don't say this with judgment, but I just think he didn't accept your point of view. Paul, I'd be quite interested in the sort of mental health strain of what something being in this situation causes to each of you. Paul.
Well, yeah, what I will say, Gloria, is that my entire life has been put on pause. I am in a flat that's unsellable. I worry constantly, daily, about how safe it is. I've woken up in the middle of the night the last couple of weeks thinking about it. It's affected the way I sleep. It's affected my concentration at work. It's a horrible situation to be in, and it's made no easier by the government and MPs quoting Latin at us, caveat emptor. I don't even know what that means, to be honest. But if it means what I think it means, which is that leaseholders should be responsible, well, no. We didn't cause this problem. I didn't cause this problem. I didn't ask for it. And, I'll finish with this. The stress of it all, the sort of mental health impact could have been made better by the government keeping to its promise. But when we're all stressed and looking to the government to do something about it, and within a week, the promises that Prime Minister Boris Johnson made, it goes back on, that just adds to that stress.
Laura, final word to Tasha. I'm so sorry. Tasha, final word to you, please. Then we have to go to the news.
Just picking up on the mental health point, I've really suffered over the past year, and my experience is certainly, I'm not alone in this. People are really, really struggling. The UK Cladding Action Group's mental health survey found that 23% of leaseholders affected by this had thought about self-harm or suicide. That is a significant number of people that are really, really struggling, and this announcement will do nothing to help them.
Well, I know we haven't got a resolution, but Kevin has heard your points, and I hope he takes them back to government. And I'm glad that. Thank you to Kevin for joining us, Kevin Holinrake. But thank you to Paul Afshar, Tasha Letchford, and Giles Grover for explaining so clearly the position that they find themselves in, which of course is of no fault of their own. Thank you, all of you. In the next half hour, it's